Okay, so welcome to our 15th Roses Talk Reading Online Sports Economics Seminars. We are delighted this week to have Maria Kotikova giving a talk on the gender differences in economic behavior of football fans in Russia. We will follow the usual format for this talk. So I will man the chat room. Well, I should say I will look at the chat room and monitor the chat room. Please put questions there in the first instance. Maria will talk for up to an hour and on her paper, and we'll have a time for Q&A at the end where I will put to her questions that have been put in the chat room, and then there'll be a time for open Q&A towards the end of the session. And so please do keep your microphones on mute for the duration of Maria's talk, and then there'll be opportunities to ask questions at the end. So Maria, please do take away your talk.
Yep. Hello everyone. Thanks, James. I hope you can see my screen now and you can hear me well.
Yeah.
Let's start. Hello everyone. My name is Maria Kotikova and I'm a research assistant at the Laboratory of Sports Studies at Higher School of Economics in Moscow. I'm thankful to Roses for this chance to present my paper internationally. That's my very first international experience, so I'm a little bit nervous, but I hope everything would be okay. And I would also like to say that this paper was very much inspired by some personal experience. So let's start. Today I'm gonna present you the paper I'm working on now. So it's paper on gender differences in economic behavior of football fans in Russia. And in my paper, I'm going to consider some stereotypes regarding the place of women in Russian football fandom on the basis of CSKA fans from Moscow. To begin with, I'd like to say that some major international competitions and increased stadiums quality, as well as increased safety during the match day, made it possible for very many women to attend stadiums in the latest few decades. And as a consequence, some significant appointments have been made in the latest few years. And here are some of them. In 2018, Vicky Sparks has become the first female commentator to work live in the UK during the World Cup 2018. In 2019, Stephanie Frappara was announced to be the first female referee in the history of Super Cup match, assisted by female referees as well. In Russia, in 2019, Anastasia Pustovoitova has become the first female referee in the history of Russian Premier League. And all these cases may cast some doubts on whether females are truly underrepresented in the community or whether any prejudices against them do still exist. However, I would argue that there are still lots of prejudices against females in football community. So back to these cases, these appointments were widely debated in the society. And back to the example of Anastasia Pustovoitova, while being the best female referee in Russia, she still works only as the fourth official at the matches. And here are some other examples which I'm gonna use to support my point of view. So in 2018, Burger King Russia suggested 3 million rubles and free Whoppers to the end of their lives to the girls who would get pregnant from the World Cup football stars during World Cup 2018. So females were encouraged to get the best football genes and to invest into Russian football team future success. And though this campaign is very offensive and Burger King Russia apologized soon and admitted that that was a great mistake, this campaign is still very expository in determining attitude towards women in Russian football fandom. So here is another example of what I'm talking about. If you search for male football fans images in Google Russia, you would get pictures of male fans with scarves and fires supporting their favorite team at the stadium. So that's the classical image of the true football fan. However, if you search for female football fans images, you would get pictures of naked girls represented in a very sexualized and objectified way. So that's the main motivation of my paper. I would state that females are permanently misrepresented in the community as the ones who do not get the essence of the game, who come to stadiums just to show off or find a partner. And females are still suffering from these prejudices. So that's the main motivation of my paper. And back to research field, the topic of different gender differences in sport fan motivation and sport fan behavior were of a great interest in late 90s and the beginning of the 21st century. And here I'm gonna comment briefly on some of these papers. So in 1999, Von Schroeder and Wilson published the paper which was called Sport Fan Motivation, Questionnaire Validation, Comparisons by Sport and Relationship to Athletic Motivation. And what they found was that females are generally mostly motivated to become fans by family needs. Later on, Ditzoller and others published the paper which is called Sex Differences in Sport Fan Behavior and Reasons for Being a Sport Fan. And what they found was that females are actually more likely to be fans for social reasons. And other social reasons, they meant that females become fans and go to stadiums just because of their family or to spend time with their friends. In 2005, Robinson and Trail found that there is lack of significant gender differences in sport fan motivation. However, all these papers led me to a thought that if any gender differences in sport fan motivation do exist between males and females, then some differences in their economic behavior, in their behavior in monetary terms might exist as well. So I decided to extend my research to some monetary behavior papers, and I took into consideration a more recent paper by Nalbantis, Pavlovsky and Coates, first published in 2015. It's called The Fan's Perception of Competitive Balance and Its Impact on Willingness to Pay for a Single Game. I decided to take into consideration this paper for several reasons. First, they used the concept of the willingness to pay, which I'm also going to use as a proxy for monetary behavior of fans at the stadium. Second, they collected data directly from online service via Facebook, which I'm also going to use in my paper because the majority of previous research was based on the student sample. And here you can see some results of their models. And even though it was not in the focus of their studies, they found that marital status is not significant for determining willingness to pay, and that females are willing to pay more than male fans. However, this effect is not robust in their model. So I decided to extend these two types of research, one based on the monetary behavior and another on gender differences, and to create my own research. To conduct proper analysis, I formulated two main research hypotheses, which were based on widely held stereotypes. The first stereotype, which is quite popular in Russia, is that females actually show fake interest in football. It's based on the belief that females do not get the essence of the game, so they just pretend to be real fans to impress men or to find a partner, but never because of the true fan loyal reasons. So my hypothesis in terms of this stereotype and in terms of willingness to pay would be the following. So males who consider themselves as committed fans will be willing to pay more than those not involved, which is quite intuitive. And for female fans, we would observe the opposite relation. So female fans' willingness to pay will not vary significantly based on their commitment to the team. In simple words, female fans, even those females who would state that they are committed fans, loyal fans, would not differ significantly in their willingness to pay from those females who are not involved, just because we work on the assumption that females cannot be really involved fans. The second hypothesis is based on a very popular stereotype that female fans do actually attend stadiums to find partner. So if that's true, then we can test whether single female fans are willing to pay for a ticket more than female fans in relationships. It means that single female fans who are interested in finding a partner at the stadium would be ready to overpay for a ticket because of their desire to find a partner at the stadium, whereas female fans in relationships would not include this evaluation into their evaluation of the ticket to the game. However, for male fans, we would observe the different situation. So male fans' willingness to pay will not differ significantly based on their relationship status. And here are my hypotheses, which I'm going to test later on. But first, I suggest we move on to the section of data. To conduct this analysis, I collected data manually. So I developed an online survey form. The target audience of this form were CSKA fans who had ever experienced any stadium visit. In the questionnaire, there were questions about their social and demographic characteristics, and there also were some questions on their attendance and fan-specific factors. Fans were also asked about their willingness to pay, and it was an open-ended question which was formulated in the following way. What's the maximum amount of money you are willing to pay for a ticket to CSK versus Spartak Moscow home game? This question is the same as it was in the paper by Nalbantis, Pavlovsky and Coates. So I chose this particular match because the questionnaire was held during the coronavirus pause. So I needed some well-known match to expect objective answers regardless of the uncertainty of the match date and regardless of the uncertainty of the upcoming events. And CSK versus Spartak Moscow seems to be one of the most principal, if not the most principal matches in Russian football. So it's a derby with a long history of rivalry. So I do really expect objective answers. I spread the questionnaire through 3 main platforms to avoid biasing the sample. So these were a Telegram fan channel. These were local fan groups in Vkontakte, which is the biggest social net in Russia. And I also used Facebook page of sports journalists to spread the questionnaire because of some specifics of Facebook followers. And after excluding incorrectly filled responses and responses without some answers, the final data set of 547 observations has been formed for further analysis. And here are summary statistics of this data set. First, average willingness to pay is 3,857.7 rubles. Here I should note that all of my results would be presented in rubles, but not to confuse you, $1 is about 71 rubles, so it's about $50. The minimum amount of money fans were willing to pay was 0, but there was just one answer like that. And the maximum amount of money fans were willing to pay was 30,000 rubles. And that actually stands in line with the ticket prices to this particular match previous season. Fans were also asked about their age, and the average age of the sample is 33.4 years, with the youngest participant of 11 years old and the oldest one at 78 years old. Females were about 18% of the sample, and here I should note that there is no official statistics on stadium attendance divided by gender or any other social and demographic factors in Russia. So I took into consideration results of European Championships, where females are 20 to 25% of the sample. And I also checked the official fan page of CSK fans, where females were about 19% of the followers. I also asked respondents about their unemployment status, and there were about 22% of unemployed fans in the sample. And I also asked them about their relationship status. I preferred to ask them about relationship status rather than marital status because of some marriage specifics in Russia. And while measuring their income, I also took into consideration the tradition that in Russia, researchers usually do not ask about income directly because to avoid many non-responses. So these were categories of the ability of a person to buy any items without borrowing any money. So the highest income category was equal 1, and all the others were equal 0. Moving on to attendance and fan-specific factors, here are also some dummies I use in my model. So the first variable is stadium acquaintance, which was equal 1 for those fans who said that stadium visit is a great chance to find a partner. So they were equal 1 and 0 if fans were not interested in finding a partner at the stadium. There was also a variable for a stadium visit, which was equal 1 if the person attended at least one match this season, and 0 otherwise, and there were about 80% of those who attended at least one match this season. The next variable was categorical, so I asked fans about the section they do usually attend while attending the stadium, and there were 4 sections at the stadium, which are C, S, K, and D, and I would talk about their specifics later on. And there was the 5th category for those who do not attend one particular section. So you can see the results in the table. Another variable was season ticket, and it was equal 1 for season ticket holders and 0 otherwise. So there were about 37% of season ticket holders in the sample. Another variable was involvement. To test my hypothesis, I used the perceived involvement measured by fans themselves. So it was also equal 1 if the fan stated that they were a very committed fan, and 0 otherwise. I also added 2 non-game motives, which were also covered in some previous literature, which was family time, and it was equal 1 for those fans who stated that spending time with family and friends is one of the most important motives to attend the stadium, and there were about 22% of those who shared this view. And the last variable here is relax. It was equal 1 for those fans that stated that opportunity to relax at the stadium and to spend free time is the very important motive to attend stadium. So I suggest we move on to econometric specification. This model was partially based on the paper by Nelbantis, Pavlovsky and Coates, which I mentioned before. However, I made some changes. So first of all, I excluded the distance variable because it seems not to be the case of Russia, where the distances between the cities are really great. So the majority of CSKA fans live in Moscow. I also did not exclude season ticket holders because I was not asking about one particular match. So season ticket holders may have already bought the ticket there. So here are some variables I use in this model. So it's a gender of the respondent, it's their age. I also added age squared because it seems intuitive that those of middle age would be willing to pay more than some teenagers and more than oldsters. There is variable for income, there is variable for unemployment, for relationship status, stadium visit, stadium section, which I've already discussed before, stadium involvement, and known game motives to attend the stadium. So here you can see the results of the estimation of the baseline model. These are results of the ordinary least squared regression. And I suggest I comment on each of the coefficient briefly. So first of all, the coefficient for female is negative. However, it's not significant at the 10% level, so we cannot comment and make any conclusions. The coefficient for age is positive and significant at the 10% level, and the coefficient for age squared is negative and significant at the 5% level. So our assumption that those in the middle age are willing to pay more than young and old people is true for this data set. And the average age until willingness to pay would grow is about 30 years, and then it starts to decline. The coefficient for income is positive and significant at the 1% level. It has the magnitude of 2,467.6 rubles. So those with high income are willing to pay averagely 2,467.6 rubles more than those who are not in the highest income category. The coefficient for unemployment is not significant here. The coefficient for being single is negative, but it's not significant at the 10% level. So we're going to test in our hypothesis whether that's true, whether it has the opposite direction for females and males. So the results might change. The stadium acquaintance variable was also not significant at the 10% level. However, the variable for stadium visit was significant at the 5% level, and those who had visited at least one home game this season were willing to pay 861.6 rubles more. This might happen due to gained experience fresh in mind. And here we go to the section variable, and as you can see from the table, sections C, S, and K coefficients are not significant. And here I should make a brief comment on the sections themselves. So the section C and section K are the central sections with the most expensive tickets. However, there is a high variation of the prices inside of these sections. So different sectors of section C have different price. And For that reason, because the baseline category of this categorical variable are the ones who do not attend one particular section, the results might become insignificant. Back to section specifics, section S is the cheapest section at the stadium, as well as section A. However, there is some differences between them. So section A is an active fan support section, whereas section S is only partially active fan support section. So those who attend section S might not be that much stuck to this particular section. And for that reason, the coefficient is not significant here as well. However, for the section A, the coefficient is negative and significant at the 1% level. So those who usually attend section A are willing to pay averagely 1,869.5 rubles less. And as I've already said, those who attend section A are the most committed fans, so they often go there, and their choice doesn't change over time or over some different games. As we can see here, season ticket variable is also not significant at the 10% level. However, the involvement coefficient is significant at the 1% level, and those fans who consider themselves to be the involved fans are willing to pay 787.2 rubles more than not involved ones. However, as I've already mentioned, we're going to test whether this affect confirms for males and females separately. Back to the table, we can see that those who feel that relaxing is a very important motive to attend stadium are willing to pay 635.2 rubles more than others. And the coefficient for family time is negative, which might be the consequence of the fact that those who attend stadium with their family are often buying more than one ticket, so they would be willing to pay less for each ticket to the match. However, this effect is not significant, so we cannot comment thoroughly on that. And to test my hypothesis, to comment on my hypothesis, I need further specifications to be done. And what I did was to split males and females on the basis of additional characteristics. So there were 3 additional characteristics. First one was for relationship status, and here you can see summary statistics for single females, females in relationships, males in relationships, and single males. The same separation for those who are interested in finding a partner at the stadium or not. And the third group was for males and females divided by their involvement status. So here is the first hypothesis I've already mentioned before. And here are also the results of the ordinary least squared regression. I actually used the model which I announced before, but I excluded independent variables of involvement and female and added 3 out of 4 categories to this model. So to make it clear, there are 2 specifications. In the first specification, the base category are involved females. And as we can see from the table, involved females are willing to pay 944.7 rubles more than not involved females. And this effect is significant at the 5% level. From the second specification, we can see that involved males are willing to pay 721.6 rubles more than not involved males. And this effect is significant at the 5% level as well. And there are no significant differences between involved males and involved females, and not involved males and not involved females. So we can see that hypothesis 1A is supported by the data presented, and male fans who consider themselves to be committed ones are actually willing to pay more than those not involved. And this is quite intuitive result. And the hypothesis 1B cannot be supported by the presented data. So we can conclude that both male and female fans reflect their commitment to the team in the same way, by being ready to pay for a ticket more to show their loyalty to the team. So even if females do really pretend to show fake interest, they still behave similarly to male fans in monetary terms. And that's the key finding for this hypothesis. Back to the second hypothesis, I applied the same technique. So here is not the full table, but just to make it clear, in the first specification, the base category of the model were females in relationships. And we can see that single males are willing to pay more than females in relationships, and this effect is significant at the 2%, at the 5% level. Males in relationships are also willing to pay more than females in relationships, and this effect is significant at the 1% level. So not single males are willing to pay averagely 1,385.6 rubles more, other things being equal. And the main result we can see here is that actually single females are willing to pay more than females in relationships. This effect is significant at the 5% level, and its magnitude is about 1,066.2 rubles. From the second specification, where the base category are single males, we can see that single males are actually willing to pay less than males in relationships. And this effect is significant at 5% level as well, and the magnitude of the effect is 655.3 rubles. So the main finding of this table is that actually there is an opposite relation between relationship status for males and females. So single females are willing to pay more than females in relationships, but single males are willing to pay less than males in relationships. And in specification 3 and 4, you can also see the same technique for those who are interested in stadium acquaintance. However, no of these results are significant, and this might be due to the skepticism about the variable itself. So one might doubt whether fans are really ready to state that they are interested in finding a partner at the stadium. Here are the results of this table, and I suggest we comment on these results. So the first finding, the key finding, was that single females are willing to pay more than females in relationships. And here are some of possible explanations for this result. First of all, single female fans might be really willing to pay overpay to find a partner at the stadium. So it's consistent with the stereotype I mentioned before. So their willingness to pay is higher because they are ready to overpay for the opportunity to find a partner at the stadium. However, and for females in relationships, it would not work because they do not include this evaluation into their willingness to pay. However, I suggest my own interpretation of this result. So from personal experience, single females prefer to buy tickets to the safer sections and to the more comfortable sections. So single females who attend stadiums alone might just buy tickets to these sections, and of course such tickets are have much higher price, and that's the reason why we get these results. Another possible explanation is that actually if we work under the assumption that females in relationships go to the stadium because of their partner, then single females are more real fans, so they would have higher interest in football itself. So that's the reason why they would be willing to pay more. Moving on to the second finding of this table, we can see that single males are willing to pay less than males in relationships. And here are some of possible explanations I suggest in my paper. So first of all, male fans in relationships who attend the stadium with their partner might be willing to pay more because they attend more comfortable sections with the partner. And of course, as I've already mentioned before, more comfortable sections are more expensive sections. Another explanation is that male fans in relationships who attend stadium alone might be willing to pay more because they perceive stadium attendance as a chance to escape from the routine, from their partner. So they start to evaluate their personal time higher, and that's the reason why they are willing to pay more. Another explanation is based on the status consumption. Relationship status quite often correlates with the age and the income level, and the average age of males in relationships is higher than those who are not in relationships, and the share of male fans with the highest income category was much higher for those who are in relationships. So this might be the case when male fans in relationships would try to mark their social status and their wealth status by buying more expensive tickets. And the final finding here is that males in relationships are actually willing to pay more than females in relationships. And my explanation here is that it might be due to the tradition of Russian society. So when two partners go out somewhere, usually male partner pays for both. So females might be not that knowledgeable to the ticket prices, and that's the reason why their evaluation of the ticket prices is biased. So main results of this paper are the following. Both male and female fans who perceive themselves as committed fans are willing to pay more than the others. And we've already discussed the mechanism. However, I would appreciate if you suggest any other interpretations of these results. We also found that single males are willing to pay less than males in relationships, and single females are willing to pay more than females in relationships. And here, once again, I would appreciate any of your comments and suggestions on why this might be so. To conclude, I'd like to say that part of the hypotheses I tested in the beginning were not supported by the presented data. So it feels like the stereotypes might be true, but there might also be some other explanations. What is more, to interpret results thoroughly, we need some further analysis to be done. So as I've already mentioned before, this might be the willingness to pay might be affected by the perceived safety at the stadium, which might be the case for female fans. And what's more, we might control for the fact whether a fan attends the stadium with their partner, alone, or with their friends or some other people, because this might also help us in interpreting the results of this paper. To sum up, I'd like to say that I feel that this paper is much more of social significance because it helps to destroy some of stereotypes regarding the women in Russian football fandom. But of course, it might be useful for marketers of CSKA in determining ticket pricing policy. It might be useful for marketers of the clubs with comparable fan movements as well. And of course, the results are limited to the sample of just one football club from Russia, so we cannot extend them to the whole Russian football fandom. Yet, the results might be interesting for sociologists and other researchers. I think that that's all for today. I would be glad to discuss the paper, and I would be happy for any of your comments on this.
Thank you very much, Maria. So there's a few questions in the chat room, and I've encouraged people who want to ask questions by email to email me if they want to type the questions out if they can't access the chat room, and we'll equally in a few moments open up to a Q&A where people can ask questions. In terms of the comments, Carl Singleton says that noting on your descriptive statistics, you had a 22% unemployment share. So I guess a question there is that seems a bit higher than the national unemployment rate for Russia as a whole. I don't know if you had any thoughts or reflections on that.
I agree that it's much higher than the national level of unemployment. However, this seems to be the specifics of those who attend the stadiums. So obviously there are lots of children there, and there are lots of oldsters. So that's why the level of unemployment might be higher than the national one.
Yeah, so I guess it also reflects, it simply reflects non-employment rather than necessarily unemployment, presumably, in the sense that you have people that are outside of the workforce that are assigned to being unemployed.
Could you repeat?
I think I was just saying that it possibly reflects non-employment rather than unemployment per se, in the sense that, as you mentioned, you've got people who are outside the workforce, older people and younger people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Carl also says, and I may butcher the pronunciation of this, but he says he'd be tempted to estimate a blinder Oaxaca, I guess, equation to decompose this willingness to pay gap. And Carl, if you want to follow that question up and do it more justice, please feel free to.
Yeah, so I would just recommend estimating the models separately for men and women, and then decomposing the average willingness to pay gap just to observe whether it's coefficient effects or composition. Just a standard Oaxaca decomposition. There might be issues there, the fact whether or not your average gap on the left-hand side is representative of the real willingness to pay gap, but I still think maybe it'd be quite interesting to allow all the variables to vary by gender, all the coefficients to vary by gender, and then do such a decomposition.
Thanks, I would work on that.
Yeah. Okay, Sarah Jewel asks, did you ask in the survey who fans would normally attend games with?
I asked only about whether they attend the stadium alone or with someone. But when I was working on the empirical part, I understood that this might lead to different results, because those who attend the stadium with someone might be attending the stadium with their partner, and that's one story, and the one track in interpreting the results, and they might attend the stadium with friends or some other people, and that's another story in interpreting the results, which I also mentioned in the results slides.
Yeah. Then we have another question, which is, did you carry out some diagnostic tools for checking your regression model?
Yep, here I was working on that, and I thought that it would be a good robustness check to test the ordered probitory logic. However, there is problem with putting borders on how to divide the price categories between how to divide the price of the tickets, and that's the main problem. So I need some explanation of why I use these borders or others, and I'm still working on that now.
Okay, thank you. And then Carl also followed up to say that he believes, and I agree with him, that the results that you've got warrant a bigger study. And in that, trying to, you mentioned it at the end in your conclusions that it might be quite nice to expand it to other teams in the Russian Premier League, for example. I've got a couple of hands raised. So first of all, Alex Creamer has a question, and after that we'll go to Bernd Frick. So Alex, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, James. Thank you, Maria. Excellent talk. If it was your first talk, this is really excellent. Much better than my first, that's for sure.
Likewise.
So well done, молодец. It's in Russian. Anyway, so I have several comments. You know, the questionnaire thing in economics is, well, not the first choice of economists, but it has its place for sure. And to make it, well, for example, why won't you exclude those who were not in stadium? Because, like, what is the meaning of willingness to pay if they have never attended any game this season? So this is the first. And the second, you have this willingness to pay of those who have a seasonal ticket, but why would they want to pay? So I would exclude them as well. Those who have seasonal ticket of the home team, I would exclude them. So these are the two comments about the data. And the third one about the empirical estimation, I might have missed something, but you excluded the main effect in your, can you explain why?
Yeah, so to the first question, the target here is written that the target audience were the fans who had experienced any stadium visit. So that's the question. That's the way I excluded those who had never attended the stadium. So I kept in the data set only those who have ever been to the stadium, and being to this particular stadium might not be of interest because CSKA have introduced a new stadium not far ago. So 5 or 10 years ago, they were playing at another home stadium and that's why I kept those who do not visit the stadium this particular season, or just didn't attend this particular stadium. Is it enough to explain, or maybe I should give some more extent?
That's fine, but with regard to excluding main effect, this is more.
Yep, I would comment on this. First, season ticket holders were in the sample because in my questionnaire I just asked about their willingness to pay for CSKA versus Spartak Moscow game without a particular date, without any comments on that. So that's the actual reasons why I used this particular match, because it's assumed feels like the majority of CSKA fans have ever been to this derby, and they know the amount of money they're willing to pay for this game. It's like El Clásico in Spain. So we can expect objective answers regardless of the fact that someone has season ticket, because they're also the Russian Cup as well, where CSKA and Spartak Moscow played a few months ago. So I don't feel like that's the big problem here. And that's actually the comment. This comment could also be extended to the perceived competitive balance story, because it's like the most principal derby for any fan. There are always sold outs, and it seems to be not fair to doubt whether any fan wants to get to this game and wants to pay money for these tickets. So that's the reason why I excluded perceived competitive balance here as well.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Next hand raised is from Bernd Fricks. So Bernd, if you want to ask your question.
Yes, thanks a lot for this interesting presentation, Maria. I have a rather simple question. 17% or 70.6% of the respondents in your survey are female. Does this reflect the share of women in the stadium? In Germany, for example, about 1/3 of the people attending live matches are female. And I think it's quite similar in other Western European leagues. Does that mean that women are underrepresented in your survey, or is less than 1/5 of the attendees in the stadium female in Russia?
Yep, I've already mentioned, thank you for your question. I've already mentioned that there is no official statistics on gender balance at the stadium. And I just found several interviews by some sports policies where they said that females and children are about 40% of those who attend stadiums, and that's the biggest proxy I have for the amount of females at the stadium, and that's one of the biggest limitations of this research, because we have no official statistics, and that's the problem. But from personal experience, I actually think that females are about, it feels like there seems to be much less than 1/3 at the stadiums. And back to European championships, the last notable the last notable information I found was that in 2014 or 2015, females were about 25% of attendees at the English Premier League. So it feels like it's comparable to Russia, with about 18 to 20% of the stadium attendees.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Bert. Next hand up we've got is Peter Dawson. Peter, do you want to ask your question?
Thanks, James. Thank you, Maria. Very good presentation. I just echo sentiments in terms of much better than the first presentation I ever did. Probably better than some I've done recently as well. So, but so well done. I might miss this because, again, as usual, I have to kind of disappear and then come back again. Can you just a question about your willingness to pay variable? There's two questions here. The first, in terms of the questionnaire, was this simply an open-ended question, or was it some kind of ladder payment, or which is obviously quite common in the contingent valuation literature? And then a second question, which relates to your estimation results. And again, excuse me if this question's already been asked or whether you discussed it in the presentation. But your dependent variable is in linear form, so you're using willingness to pay as a linear variable. But looking at your summary stats, which I can see on the slide here, it's clearly the case that there's quite a wide distribution in terms of this and the potential skewness here. So as a kind of further, I think James and Carl mentioned earlier about some diagnostic tests, but I think obviously it'd be worthwhile to look at logarithmic specification as well, just as a kind of further robustness check.
Thank you for your questions. I also mentioned that in my presentation that the willingness to pay question was in open-ended format. So it was just, what's the maximum amount of money you're willing to pay for a ticket? Because I didn't want to create any anchors for those who are filling this questionnaire. And that's the reason why I used the open-ended form question. Of course, I understand that there might be other options like a closed-ended format, or what's the maximum share of your income you're willing to pay for a ticket. But here I thought that open-ended questions would be the most suitable story here. And moving on to the second questions, yes, I use the linear form here. And actually in logarithm form, which also use Nalbandian-Pavlovsky encodes in the paper, there was much lower R squared, and it seemed not to fit the model. But I also tested it as well, and some other forms.
Can I just make a follow-up, James?
Yeah.
So how many zeros? What's the frequency of zeros in the data set? Because obviously you can't take a log of 0, but you could obviously do a linear transformation by adding 1 to everything and then taking the log of that. But is there quite a lot of zeros, or is it very small number of zeros in the sample here?
Yep, there was a really very small number of zeros in willingness to pay. There were like 2 or 3 responses.
Okay, and just one final, I'll go now, James, but just one final thing. Because obviously your age range is between 11 and 78, again, what I would suggest, I mean, obviously your sample size isn't massive, but if you restricted it to adults to see how the results compare, so obviously, you know, is there a tendency for those in the kind of younger age group to inflate their willingness to pay, or do they maybe go the opposite way? But I think as a further robustness check, if you do 16 plus as an age range, just as a further robustness check, and that would be something quite useful to do. I think that will also partly address the unemployment, non-employed aspect that was discussed earlier.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Peter. A different Peter also asks, says that he's missed a part of the presentation. It's a comment in the chat, and he suggests that, similar to what Peter Dawson's just said, that he would suggest a contingent valuation method for the willingness to pay estimation. So we've reached the end of the questions, and so if there are other people that want to say something, please feel free to either unmute yourself and say something, or raise your hand.
I've got a couple of questions.
Dennis?
So thank you very much, Maria. This is very interesting. And just for the record, me and Peter Parshikov and Anna Vikova all spent time in the CISCA fan section at a football match a couple years ago. And so one of the questions I have for you is, how many women actually are in, I think you said it was section A. Do you have that information?
I will check for it, but I don't have numbers right now.
Because my impression from from when we were in that section was that there were almost no women in that section. That I don't know what the rest of the stadium was almost completely empty, but that section had very few women. And so that number of 17% doesn't strike me as unreasonable. But I want you to talk to me about this stadium acquaintance idea. What exactly do you, I messaged Anna about this and she said, yes, they're looking for somebody equally crazy as them. Do you really think that people, do they have the same idea of finding a partner from this question as maybe a silly American might think that means?
Thank you for your questions. Back to the first one. I'm actually the Spartak Moscow fan, and I saw that at the active fan support section at Spartak there are also very few women. So the majority of women attend family sections or the central VIP sections or something like that. So I agree with you that there are almost no females at the section A. And about the stadium acquaintance variable, you know, there are even like chats in the official groups where one might write if she wants to go to the match with the man or with the woman, and that's like the common story for females and males to make acquaintances at the stadium, and that's the reason why I included this variable in my data set.
Okay. It's fascinating. I was going to ask you about doing a TOBIT, but since there's only, I think you said 2 zeros, that it doesn't make any sense. Very interesting. I'm very happy to see this work, not even just because it cites me a lot, but because it's a really interesting project. But I do think looking at more leagues or more teams is a good idea if you can do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. I had a question from Pierre-Charles Poirier, who's here but perhaps unable to use the chat function. And he says he picked up on the what you mentioned about the custom that Russian men would pay for themselves and their partner when going to the stadium. And so he was wondering if there was some way to control the implicit behind this norm. So, you know, being sure that men think of buying a ticket for themselves, just as women do, not for them, plus partners, kids, pets, and so on. I think just asking you to perhaps expand a little bit more on this custom that you mentioned. Sorry, I can't hear you, Maria.
Could you repeat?
Pierre Charles is here. I don't know, Pierre, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Thank you, James. I'm not sure my mic works well. Yeah, but my question was simply that you mentioned that custom, and I was wondering hence whether women and men think about the same thing when they think about buying a ticket. Maybe men think that they buy a ticket for themselves and for the kids as well, while married women or women in relationship, when you ask them how much would you pay, they think, oh, if I have to pay, then I pay the ticket for me only. In fact, I'm wondering, but maybe there's something you might try to control, just to get sure that people have the same thing in mind when you ask the question. And by the way, it's really nice to see how which appears to be the same question might be a different question for social reasons.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I try to formulate the question in the very straight way. So there was the formulation. I formulated is that in the way like the amount of money you're willing to pay for one ticket for the match. And I understand that males who buy 2 tickets might, however, just a second. Seems that even if we make some notions on what they would be willing to pay, it's still quite objective. It seems to me quite objective because those females who think like I would be willing to pay if I had to, it's still their evaluation of the game. And I use willingness to pay here not as the very close proxy of what they're going to pay, but it's rather their evaluation and the way they think they would be willing to pay for this ticket. But yep, that's a great comment. So I would try to control for it in next research. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre, Charles, and we have Alex with his hand up. Go on, Alex.
Yeah, thank you. I will follow up the Pierre's question, and in that regard, maybe, well, willingness to pay for a ticket, maybe they understand it also a bit different from another perspective, that after the game, they need to go to a bar or to a pub, to a restaurant, and let's say women, like married women, maybe they don't have to, and this may also somewhat affect the answers.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you for your comment. There are some external specifics as well. However, it seems to me that it's really difficult to make it more clear what we were asking about, because maybe we can ask not only about the willingness to pay for a ticket, but we might also ask about their willingness to pay for the whole stadium attendance, which also includes going to the bar before or after the match, or paying for a taxi or something like that. And yep, that seems to be a very good extension of this research.
Maria, did you say that you're a Spartak fan?
Yep.
So why did you not do this for Spartak?
To be honest, it was, I just felt that I have more, let's call it, power to collect this data for CSKA fans, because I know one of the leaders of the CSKA fan movement, so it was easier for me to collect this data set, because it's really hard to collect any data on Russian football fans, because they are quite close in their community. So that's just the technical reason rather than something another.
Okay, and since Spartak CSKA is such a strong historic rivalry, do you think that your results would be substantially different if it was, I don't know, Sistak Rubin or Sistak Zenit or some other combination, that you would get different results?
I think we might get different results because first of all, we have to control for perceived competitive balance then, because for some very involved fans, the match between the CSKA and the outsider of the championship would be of one level of competitive balance, and for example, for not really involved fans, it would be close to zero, and they would just prefer not to go to that match. But actually, I think that if we would ask about some other game, then the gender balance would change significantly, because the Derby Day is the day when very many females might come to the stadium, and 18% seems to be very many females. And, you know, at the games of very lower competitive balance, there seem to be less females, so the results might change a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sarah Jules asked and put a further comment in the chat, which is that when you're doing any follow-up study, it might be useful to pick up more on the possible motivations for attending matches. And you can ask questions that get knowledge of the sport or the club. So social norms are important. So it would be useful to do cross-country comparisons also, potentially, maybe even comparisons across sports. And Sarah says this as a female who attends several sports. She attends rugby and cricket here in England. Her motivation is pure interest and loyalty to her teams. But obviously different sports attract different types of fans. And she says that also that she assumes women are much less likely to be season ticket holders.
Thanks for the first women cross-sectional here. I think and I didn't get the question on season ticket. So could you repeat, please?
Yeah, sure. So the question was that she assumes that women are less likely to be season ticket holders than men.
Yep, this also might be the true, and maybe it would be a great idea to separate season ticket holding by gender as well. Thank you for this comment.
Okay, and then Peter Peshakov adds that he thinks the response, or he asks whether you think the response rate might be correlated with the willingness to pay.
The response for what?
The response rate, I presume, for the survey. But Peter, if you do want to ask that question again, unmute your mic, you're welcome to.
Yeah, thank you, James. Thank you, Maria. Very nice presentation. I mean, response rate to survey that, for example, my perception is that women, they are more, I don't know, that, well, yeah, that those who are fans or gender might affect the number of responses you got. Thanks.
Yep, I think that there are, of course, more fans, true fans between males, the so-called true fans, but under true fans I mean those who attend all the home games and so on. But I actually tried to avoid biasing the sample, and this Facebook story was also aimed to find females who might be not that interested in football or who are not that committed fans, so to confirm the balance at the sample. And back to the comment on the willingness to pay, yeah, but I still do understand that this is very debatable way of formulating the question, but still I think that it's quite that it suits the research in a good way. But maybe it would be better in the further research to add some other questions on the willingness to pay.
Thank you.
Okay, any final few questions and comments? Okay, well, in that case, thank you again, Maria, for a fantastic talk, really very interesting, and as many people have said, a very impressive first academic presentation. And I'm just going to share my screen. If you're able to unshare your screen, Maria. Yep. I was hoping to. Yeah, I'm just going to try and do mine again because what I was hoping to share doesn't seem to be appearing. Okay, well, I'm not going to share what I thought I was going to share. I'll go to the desktop actually. And can you see the slides? Yep. Okay, so just to flag up what's coming next week. Next week we have two talks next week. Our first Rosie's doubleheader, and we're going to have talks by Alex Farnell first of all from Lancaster University, looking at baseball in the US, and then we're going to have a talk by Daniel Weimar from the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany, looking at still evidence of a positive link between media consumption and the demand for sports amongst children. So hope to be able to welcome you all back again next week for our next set of Roses Talks. And thank you once again, Maria, and thank you everybody for your participation this week. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.